The morning dew still clung to the roses when I heard the sharp crunch of expensive heels against the stone pathway. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Only one woman would dare stomp through my father's prized garden in designer heels, Veronica. Her voice was as syrupy as ever, dripping with fake sweetness. Still playing in the dirt, I see. I kept my focus on pruning the white roses, my father's favorites. The ones he had planted for my wedding day. The wedding that had ended in betrayal, divorce papers, and my ex-husband running off with the woman now standing behind me. "Hello, Veronica. You know why I'm here?" She moved closer, her shadow stretching across the flower bed. "The reading of the will is tomorrow, and Connor and I think it's best if we discuss things civilly." I finally turned, wiping my soil-covered hands on my gardening apron. "There's nothing to discuss. This is my father's house." "This was your father's estate," she corrected, her perfectly painted red lips curling into a smirk. "And since Connor was practically a son to James for 15 years, we believe we're entitled to our fair share." The pruning shears in my grip suddenly felt heavier. "The same Connor who cheated on his wife with his secretary?" I asked, my voice sharp. "That Connor's ancient history," Veronica said with a dismissive wave of her manicured hand. "James forgave him. They still play golf every Sunday until, well, you know." She paused, letting the weight of my father's death hang between us. The wound was still fresh. He had been gone just 2 weeks. And now, here she was, circling like a vulture, thinking I was easy prey. "My father wouldn't have left Connor a dime," I said firmly, rising to my full height. "He was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them." Her fake smile faltered. "We'll see about that. Your brother, Lucas, seems to think differently." A chill ran down my spine. My brother and I hadn't spoken since the funeral, where he'd spent more time consoling Connor than his own sister. "You've spoken to Lucas?" My voice was tight. Veronica stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh, honey, we've done more than speak. He's been very helpful." I tightened my grip on the shears, remembering my father's words from years ago. "The roses need a firm hand, Maddie. But never a cruel one. Even the sharpest thorns serve a purpose." "Get off my property," I said quietly, "before I forget my manners." She laughed, the sound like shattering glass. "Your property? That's cute." Her gaze swept over the sprawling estate. "This house is worth $20 million, Madeline. Did you really think you'd get to keep it all? Playing house in your daddy's mansion while the rest of us get nothing?" "My father built this home with his own hands," I shot back. "Brick by brick. He planted every tree, designed every room. This isn't about money, Veronica. This is about legacy." She snorted. "Wake up, Maddie. Everything is about money. And tomorrow, when that will is read, you're going to learn that the hard way." She turned to leave, but paused at the garden gate. "Oh, and you might want to start packing. Connor and I will need at least a month to renovate before we move in." As her heels clicked down the path, I looked at the roses. Their white petals were now speckled with dirt, crushed by my trembling hands. Dad always said white roses symbolized new beginnings. But all I could see was red. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only person who would understand. "Aaliyah, it's me," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "Veronica just paid me a visit." "And?" she asked, her tone sharp. "She's exactly as bad as we thought. And there's something about the will I need to discuss with you." Aaliyah didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in 20 minutes.
"Don't worry, Maddie."
Your father was smarter than they know." As I hung up, something caught my eye. A small envelope poking out from beneath one of the rose bushes. Its corner was damp with dew, but the handwriting on it was unmistakable, my father's. And it was addressed to me. With shaking hands, I picked it up, wondering how long it had been waiting there, hidden among the thorns. The paper felt heavy, like it carried more than just words. "Well, Dad," I whispered, turning the envelope over in my hands. "Looks like you left me one last surprise." The sound of Veronica's car engine faded into the distance as I stood there, gripping what felt like the first piece of a puzzle my father had left behind. Whatever game she and Connor were playing, they were about to find out they'd chosen the wrong opponent. Aaliyah arrived right on time, a leather briefcase in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. "I figured we might need this," she said, lifting the bottle as she walked into my father's study. I was still holding the unopened envelope, perched on the edge of his leather chair. The room smelled of old books and pipe tobacco, a scent I wasn't ready to let go of. "You haven't opened it yet?" she asked, setting the briefcase down with a thunk. I turned the envelope over in my hands. "After what Veronica said about Lucas helping them, I wanted to wait for you." "Open it," she insisted, pouring 2 generous glasses of wine. "Your father was very specific about certain things being revealed at certain times." My head snapped up. "What do you mean?" She handed me a glass. "Just open the letter, Maddie." With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. A small key tumbled onto my lap. I took a deep breath and read aloud. "Dear Maddie, if you're reading this, then someone has already made a move on the estate. Knowing human nature as I do, I'm guessing it's Veronica. She always did remind me of a shark. All teeth, no soul." Aaliyah snorted into her wine glass. "The key enclosed opens the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside, you'll find everything you need to protect what's yours. Remember what I taught you about chess. Sometimes you have to sacrifice a pawn to protect the queen. Love, Dad." I looked at Aaliyah, my heart pounding. He knew this was coming. She reached for the key. "Then let's see what he left behind." As I unlocked the drawer and pulled it open, I realized one thing. This fight was just beginning. I looked up at Aaliyah, who was already moving toward the desk. "You knew about this?" "I helped him set it up," she admitted, gesturing for me to use the key. "Your father came to me 6 months ago, right after his diagnosis. He knew exactly how things would play out." The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside was a thick manila envelope and a USB drive. "Before you look at those," Aaliyah said, sitting on the edge of the desk, "there's something you need to know about tomorrow's will reading. Your father added a codicil 3 days before he died. A what? A modification to the will. And trust me, it's going to change everything." I spread the contents of the envelope across the desk. Photos spilled out. Dozens of them. Veronica meeting with a man in a dark parking lot. Connor entering a lawyer's office that wasn't Aaliyah's. Bank statements. Email printouts. Dad had them investigated. My voice came out in a whisper. "Better." Aaliyah's smile was sharp. "He had them followed." She tapped the USB drive. "That contains video footage of Veronica attempting to bribe your father's nurse for information about his will, 2 days before he died." My hands shook as I picked up one of the photos. "Is that Lucas? Meeting with Veronica?" 3 weeks before your father's death," Aaliyah confirmed. "But look at his face in the next photo." The second image showed my brother leaving the meeting. His expression was twisted with disgust, and he was holding what looked like a check. "He kept the check as evidence," Aaliyah explained. "Brought it straight to your father." That's when James knew he had to act fast. "But Veronica said Lucas was helping them," I muttered, my mind racing. "Your brother's been playing a dangerous game, Maddie. Feeding them just enough information to keep them confident, all while helping your father gather proof of their conspiracy." I sank back into the chair, my head spinning. Why didn't he tell me? Because Veronica needed to show her hand first. Aaliyah pulled out a thick legal document from her briefcase. "Tomorrow, when I read the will, Veronica and Connor are going to think they've won. The initial reading will grant them a significant portion of the estate." I shot up so fast my wine glass tipped over, staining the carpet red. "What?" "Let me finish." Aaliyah held up a hand. "That's when the codicil kicks in. Your father set up a trap, Maddie. The moment they accept the inheritance, they trigger a clause that reveals their attempted manipulation and fraud. Everything, the photos, the videos, the bribes, becomes public record." I stared at the evidence spread across the desk, the pieces finally clicking into place. "He made them think they won so they'd incriminate themselves," I whispered. "Exactly." Aaliyah's grin was triumphant. "The real will leaves everything to you, with a trust set up for Lucas. Veronica and Connor get nothing, except a very public exposure of their true characters. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, Aaliyah said, finishing her wine. We watched them walk right into the trap they set for you. I picked up my father's letter again, running my fingers over his familiar handwriting. Even from beyond the grave, he was protecting me, teaching me, helping me fight back. Aaliyah's voice softened. One more thing. Lucas asked to see you tonight. He has something else you need to know before tomorrow. I looked out the study window, watching the sun sink below the horizon, thinking of my brother, of Veronica's smug face in the garden, of all the pieces my father had carefully put in place. Tell him to come over, I said. It's time we had a family reunion. Lucas arrived after dark, looking nothing like the confident brother who had stood beside Connor at the funeral. His designer suit was wrinkled, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He hesitated in the doorway, clutching a leather portfolio like a shield. You look terrible, I said, breaking the ice. Yeah, well, playing double agent isn't as fun as the movies make it seem. He attempted a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Can I come in? I gestured to the chair across from me. Aaliyah had left an hour ago, but the desk was still covered in evidence. Lucas glanced at the photos. I see you found Dad's insurance policy. Why didn't you tell me what you were doing? The question came out sharper than I intended. He slumped into the chair. Because I needed to make it right. After everything with Connor, the way I treated you during the divorce. I was an idiot, Maddie. You were my brother, I corrected. You were supposed to be on my side. I know. His voice was thick with regret. He opened the portfolio and pulled out a check. I frowned. What is that? This is what Veronica offered me to testify that Dad wasn't of sound mind when he made his final will. He exhaled shakily. $500,000 to betray my own sister. I stared at the check, then at him. But you didn't cash it? No. His voice cracked. I took it straight to Dad. You should have seen his face, Maddie. Not angry, just disappointed. A lump formed in my throat. That's when he told me about his plan, Lucas continued. The grandfather clock chimed 9 times, each sound cutting through the heavy silence. There's more. He pulled out his phone, his hands unsteady. I recorded everything. Every meeting, every offer, every threat. He pressed play. Veronica's voice filled the room, smug and confident. Once the old man kicks it, we'll contest the will. With your testimony about his mental state and Connor's long relationship with him, we'll get everything. Madeline won't know what hit her. My fists clenched. When was this? 2 months ago. But wait. There's worse. He fast-forwarded. Connor's voice now. We'll sell the house. Liquidate the assets. Madeline can go back to her little apartment and her pathetic gardening business. She never deserved any of this anyway. Turn it off. My voice shook. Lucas complied, then pulled out one final document. This is why I came tonight. Veronica didn't just want the money, Maddie. She wanted revenge. I swallowed hard. Revenge? For what? For making Connor feel guilty. For making him pay alimony. For... Lucas hesitated. For making him look bad when you caught them together. The memory slammed into me like a physical blow, walking into my own bedroom, finding them there. The betrayal. The humiliation. The rage. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. So tomorrow, when the will is read, they're going to think they've won, Lucas confirmed. And then, in front of everyone, the truth will come out. I glanced down at the letter from my father, his words running through my mind. Sometimes you have to sacrifice a pawn to protect the queen. Tomorrow, the game would end. And this time, I wouldn't be the one left in checkmate. I exhaled, letting the tension slowly leave my body as I glanced at the now empty space where Haley and Holden had stood, their arrogance stripped away in front of the very cameras they had hired to celebrate their victory. Well, Isaiah said again, his voice lighter this time. That was satisfying. I turned to him, shaking my head in disbelief. You think? Aaliyah let out a breath, closing the legal folder and giving me a small, triumphant smile. Your father really did think of everything. I looked around the study, at the walls lined with books he loved, the desk where he had spent countless hours building the empire that Haley had tried to steal. The sun filtered through the windows, illuminating the papers still scattered across the desk, the undeniable proof of their guilt. I swallowed, suddenly overwhelmed. "It's over." Isaiah nodded. "Yeah, Maddie. It's over." I let out a short, incredulous laugh. After years of being manipulated, betrayed, and dismissed, first by Connor, then by Haley, and even by my own brother, I had finally won.
No.
Dad had won. Aaliyah gathered the remaining documents and locked them into her briefcase. "The estate is yours, officially and irrevocably. Lucas will get his trust, and the company will remain intact under your leadership, just as your father intended." I turned back toward the window, watching as the police led Haley and Holden outside. Haley was still fighting, her mouth moving rapidly, her expensive dress now wrinkled with desperation. Holden, on the other hand, looked resigned, like he had known, deep down, that this day was coming. I glanced at Isaiah. For so long, I had resented him, seeing him as another extension of Holden's betrayal. But now, standing beside me, I realized what Dad had seen in him, someone who, despite his mistakes, had finally found the courage to do the right thing. "Thank you," I said softly. Isaiah looked at me, a little surprised, but then he nodded. It was time. I smiled, turning back to the view of the garden. The white roses stood tall, untouched by the chaos that had erupted inside. "Dad always said white roses were for new beginnings," I murmured. Isaiah followed my gaze.
"Yeah.
"And after today, I think we finally get one." The cameras stopped rolling, the police cars disappeared down the long driveway, and the house, Dad's house, was finally silent. Justice had been served. And for the first time in a long time, I could finally breathe. I took a deep breath, steadying myself in the witness box. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on me. "They started visiting my father frequently after my divorce," I continued, my voice clear but firm. "Building trust, embedding themselves into his life. My father was a generous man, and he believed in second chances. Haley and Holden used that against him." Haley shifted in her seat, crossing her arms, her lips pressed into a thin line. "And what did you later discover about these visits?" the prosecutor asked. "That they weren't about family or reconciliation," I said, looking straight at Haley. "They were about money, control, manipulation. My father had a terminal diagnosis, and they knew that. They played the long game, ensuring they were positioned to inherit his estate." "How did you come to that conclusion?" I turned slightly, looking at Aaliyah, who gave me an encouraging nod. I lifted my chin. "Because he told me," I said. "My father knew what was happening. He hired private investigators. He documented everything. He left behind evidence, photos, emails, financial statements that showed just how calculated their actions were." The prosecutor walked toward the evidence table and picked up a thick file. "Miss Harrison, are you referring to the materials we have entered into evidence?"
Yes.
He approached the judge's bench, handing over a new document. "Your Honor, Exhibit G. A letter written by the deceased, detailing his concerns about the defendant's intentions and explicitly outlining his plan to ensure justice was served." The judge took the document, scanning it carefully. "This letter will be entered into evidence." I turned my attention back to Haley and Holden. Holden refused to look at me, his jaw tight, his hands folded in his lap. Haley, however, was trembling with rage. "This is a setup," she hissed under her breath, but loud enough for me to hear. The prosecutor ignored her outburst and continued, "Miss Harrison, in your father's letter, he states that he feared for your safety, that he believed the defendants might attempt to take more than just financial control. Can you confirm if evidence was found to support that claim?" I nodded, my stomach tightening.
Yes.
The police recovered a document from Haley's apartment. It contained plans for how she would proceed after gaining control of my father's estate, including details about orchestrating accidents that would harm me. There were even notes about framing my brother, Lucas, for financial misconduct. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Haley's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. My client denies any intention of causing harm to Miss Harrison. Overruled, the judge said sternly. The jury will consider the evidence presented. Haley's face turned ghostly pale. For the first time, real fear flickered in her eyes. The prosecutor turned back to me. And what about the defendant's reaction when they first learned of the codicil to the will? They were furious, I said simply. They realized too late that they had walked into a trap, one my father set to protect his legacy and expose their true intentions. The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. I exhaled, finally stepping down from the witness box. As I walked past the defense table, Haley's nails dug into her palms, her fury barely contained. When I sat back down beside Aaliyah, she leaned in and whispered, "You just nailed their coffin shut." The judge announced a recess, and the courtroom buzzed with hushed conversations. Reporters rushed to the exits to file their latest updates, their cameras flashing as they captured the expressions on Haley and Holden's faces. Lucas leaned over from the row behind me. "You are incredible up there," he whispered. I sighed, rubbing my hands together. "I just told the truth." "Sometimes, that's all it takes," Aaliyah said. I glanced at the prosecution table, where the DA's team was reviewing their next round of evidence. The weight of everything was settling in now. The months of lies, deception, and betrayal were finally culminating in the moment my father had orchestrated from beyond the grave. Justice. Real, undeniable justice. The verdict came 3 days later.
Guilty.
On all counts. Haley and Holden were sentenced to 20 years in prison for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted financial exploitation. The judge had no sympathy for them, citing the overwhelming evidence of their manipulation and greed. As the bailiffs led them away in handcuffs, Haley turned to me, her eyes blazing. "This isn't over," she spat, her voice venomous. I met her gaze, unshaken. "Yes, Haley, it is." And with that, she was gone. 3 months later, I stood in my father's garden, the white roses in full bloom. Isaiah and Aaliyah sat on the patio, sipping coffee and watching as I gently pruned the flowers, just as my father had taught me. "You know," Isaiah mused, "Dad really did plan everything perfectly." I nodded, wiping my hands on my apron.
He did.
"And now it's finally over." Aaliyah raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. "To new beginnings." I smiled, taking in the house, the garden, the life that was finally mine again. "To new beginnings," I echoed. Dad had always told me that white roses symbolized fresh starts. For the first time in years, I finally understood what he meant. I guess those cameras did capture their historic moment after all. By evening, the media circus Haley had wanted was in full swing, just not in the way she'd planned. News vans lined the street, my phone buzzing nonstop with reporters hungry for a statement. "You need to see this," Isaiah said, turning up the volume on Dad's old television in the study. On every channel, there she was, Haley, mascara streaked down her face, her designer dress a stark contrast to the handcuffs locking her wrists as officers led her away. The ongoing investigation into Harrison Industries has uncovered multiple instances of fraud, with sources indicating offshore accounts, dummy corporations, and evidence of financial misconduct spanning several years. "Turn it off," I muttered, rubbing my temples. "I can't watch anymore." Aaliyah burst through the door, waving her phone. "It gets better, the DA just called. They've found everything." Haley wasn't just stealing from the company. She was running a network of fraud schemes. Multiple families, multiple targets. "And Holden's?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why I still cared about my ex-husband's fate. Isaiah smirked, singing like a canary. "Turns out he's not so loyal when he's staring down serious prison time." A sharp knock at the door made us all jump. A detective stepped in, his face grim. "Miss Harrison, we need to discuss some additional evidence we've uncovered." I gestured for him to sit. "More? What now?" The detective set a thick file on Dad's desk. "We found documents in Miss West's apartment that suggest this wasn't her first attempt at a scheme like this. There are at least 3 other cases, families she targeted just like yours." Aaliyah leaned forward. "Other families?" "Yes," the detective confirmed. She would infiltrate their lives, either through employment or social connections, then manipulate her way into control over their assets. However, she never succeeded on this scale before. My stomach turned. The secretary position, it wasn't random. No, the detective said gravely. It was never random. She specifically targeted your ex-husband because of his connection to your father's company. The affair? That was just a means to an end. 3 years of self-doubt, of wondering what I had done wrong, of thinking maybe I just wasn't enough, shattered in an instant. There had never been anything wrong with me. She had planned it all. There's more, the detective said. We found this in her personal files, a detailed plan for what would happen after she gained control of the estate. He handed me a document and my blood ran cold. Detailed notes, timelines, accidents that could befall me. A plan to frame Isaiah for financial misconduct. Even sketches of how she wanted to remodel the house, starting with destroying Dad's garden. She would have killed me, I whispered. Isaiah's hands clenched into fists. She never would have gotten the chance. The detective nodded grimly. With this evidence, the charges are being upgraded. Significantly. Between the fraud, attempted bribery, and now conspiracy to commit harm, she's looking at life in prison. When he left, the three of us sat in stunned silence. Then Aaliyah's phone buzzed again. It's the DA's office, she said, glancing at the screen. Holden just finished his statement. He admitted to everything, even helping Haley access confidential company files before Dad's death. I swallowed hard. Did he know? About her plans for me? Isaiah scanned the documents.
No.
According to this, she kept that part to herself. Probably knew he wouldn't have the stomach for it. I exhaled. Dad knew. Aaliyah nodded. That's why he set this all in motion. He had never just been protecting his legacy.
He had been protecting me.
Later that evening, Isaiah placed an envelope on Dad's desk. I found this in a safe this morning, he said. It's marked, after justice is served. My hands shook as I opened it. Dad's familiar handwriting filled the page. My dear Maddie, if you're reading this, then the truth has finally come to light. Don't let this experience harden your heart. The garden still needs tending. Life still needs living. I didn't set this trap just for justice. I did it so you could be free. Free from doubt. Free from fear. And free to bloom again. Love, Dad. Outside, the reporters continued their live broadcasts, telling the world about the scandal, the arrests, the betrayal. But inside that study, surrounded by the weight of my father's foresight and love, I felt something I hadn't felt in years.
Peace.
Isaiah broke the silence. So, what now? I looked past him, out the window, at Dad's garden still standing strong despite everything that had happened. Now, I said, my voice clear. Now we rebuild. Together. 1 month later, the preliminary hearing arrived faster than expected. Sitting in that courtroom, watching Haley and Holden being let in, this time in orange jumpsuits, was surreal. Gone were the designer clothes, the arrogance, the carefully curated image. When my name was called, Aaliyah gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. You don't have to speak today, she whispered. The evidence speaks for itself. But I knew I had to. Dad's last letter had said not to let this harden my heart. Staying silent felt too much like fear. I walked to the witness stand, met Haley's glare head-on, and told the truth. Every lie, every manipulation, every betrayal. And by the time I stepped down, there was nothing left for her to hide behind. The final verdict came weeks later.
Guilty.
On all counts. Haley, Margaret Phillips, her real name, was sentenced to life in federal prison. Holden received 15 years for his role. When they led her past me, she stopped. Her voice was venomous. I hope you're happy. I met her gaze, unwavering. No, Haley. I'm free. 3 months later, I stood in my father's greenhouse. Isaiah and Aaliyah waited outside, letting me have this moment alone. On Dad's workbench sat a single envelope, addressed to me. Inside was a deed. And another letter. Maddie. By now, justice has been served. But justice wasn't the only thing I wanted to cultivate. I grew more than flowers in this greenhouse. I grew hope. Hope for you to find your strength again. To bloom despite the shadows others cast. The deed in this envelope is for the vacant lot next to your old shop. I bought it the day after I confronted Margaret. It's time for Harrison Gardens to grow beyond our home. Your talent for bringing beauty into the world shouldn't be limited to one garden. Some flowers bloom best after frost. You've weathered your winter, Maddie. Now, it's time to bloom again. Love always, Dad. I clutched the deed to my chest, tears slipping down my cheeks. When I walked back into the house, I spread it on the counter. Dad bought me the lot next to my shop, I said, my voice thick. He wanted me to expand. Aaliyah smiled. Then it's time to grow something new. Isaiah raised his coffee mug.
To Dad.
To justice, Aaliyah added. I lifted mine. To blooming again.